Most coffee roasters only know the origin of their beans from the import label. A region, maybe a producer's name, but that's it. Not Mule. They wanted a deep connection to the farm itself. So today, we're talking about Mule Coffee Roasters and the story behind that connection. Welcome to Brand Story, brought to you by Specialty Roasters. We help coffee drinkers find better coffee by discovering the story behind the cup, the people, the flavors, and the decisions that shape what ends up in your cup. Back in 2010, at a little cafe called Bambini on Park Espresso by Hyde Park here in Sydney, two young Colombians met. Two people, one cafe, and a shared obsession. Both were from Colombia, both were working behind the bar, but they couldn't have been more different. Introducing Cesar Vela and Nicolas Tobon. One of them was a paisa from Colombia's rich mountain culture surrounding Medellin, known for its big energy, hospitality, business instinct, and love for coffee. The other was a Rolo from Colombia's capital of Bogota, more city-minded, more reserved, more methodical. And instead of clashing, they clicked. Day by day, they stood on the front lines serving customers, taking orders, making coffees, having conversations. And slowly, they began to understand how Australians experience coffee, not with industry reports or business models, but cup by cup, face to face. They learned what people connect with and discovered how coffee can become part of daily someone's routine, even their identity. But neither of them saw coffee as just a job. They wanted more growth, more understanding, and more control over the craft. For Cesar, cafe work wasn't enough. Alongside his barista shifts, he also worked at a roastery, learning what happens to the coffee long before it hits the espresso machine, and how roasting can actually shape the flavor from the bean itself. Around the same time, Cesar managed to secure a coffee stall at Carriageworks Farmers Market. Now, back then, it wasn't the big destination it is today. It was still finding its feet. Fewer stalls, fewer crowds, but for Cesar, it was a start, a place to serve coffee directly to customers. Nico came from an engineering background, but for him, coffee wasn't some temporary gap year escape. He could have gone back to engineering at any time, but coffee gave him something different, something more. Instead of sitting behind a computer solving problems from a great distance, he was face to face with people every single day, making coffee, having conversations, getting to know the regulars, and becoming part of people's daily routine. There was a real, direct connection there, and as a Colombian, coffee wasn't just something he served, it was also a source of great national pride. And that early experience soon opened a new door. A new cafe was opening in Sydney, and the owner chose Cesar's roast as the house blend. He then hired Nico as the floor manager. This was one of the first moments where their individual strengths began to merge into something more. As the years went on, they saw each other under pressure. Busy rushes, equipment failures, difficult customers. And through it all, they learned what each other was really made of, their standards, their work ethics, their pride in doing things right. And eventually, over time, that trust would become the foundation of what would eventually be Mule Coffee Roasting. Now, aside from Carriageworks farmers markets, which again, back then, was not the busy destination it is, Cesar needed more ways to sell and promote his coffee. He fought for a small vendor spot at local events like City to Surf and the Sydney Half Marathon. It was humble, like any good beginning, just serving coffee to tired runners and early morning crowds. Cesar invited Nico to join him, and that was the beginning of their real collaboration. No fancy cafe, no big investors, no polished brand identity, just two Colombians making coffee with the belief that they could offer something better. As their reputation grew, they were offered another long-term market opportunity, Ramsgate Markets. Nico took over Ramsgate while Cesar stayed behind at Carriageworks. And little by little, those markets became more than just a place to sell coffee. As Nico puts it was very hard at the beginning. But apart from being hard, they found something more than just customers. They found a community, people who cared about quality, sustainability, connection. From those early mornings under market tents they grew slowly and steadily into something with a lot of heart. And as their roles changed from cafe staff to people with a lot of responsibility for their own product, their standards just got higher, especially for Cesar. Time and time again, he saw great coffees get rejected. Not because they weren't good enough, but because they weren't profitable enough. The coffees he believed in kept losing out to safer, cheaper options, and eventually, he stopped compromising. Cesar decided to start his own company, and Nico's wife Diana was there too from the very beginning, a quiet but essential part of the company. Together, they created the Colombian Connection Coffee. Even the name carried a sense of meaning and pride with it. They wanted the brand to represent more than just coffee beans from Colombia. It was about connection. Connection to the origin, to the culture, to the producers. A direct line from the mountains of Colombia to the cafes of Australia. And as for the brand image, well, that's where the mule comes in. Long before wheelies, jeeps, and modern logistics reached the farms, Colombian coffee moved through the mountains by mule, up steep terrain, across rough roads, carrying loads that the vehicles just couldn't handle. In many ways, the mule carried coffee on the first mile of its long journey. And for Cesar and Nico, that symbol meant something more, not just for transportation, but for connection, a connection back to the source. The company itself remained Colombian Connection Coffee, but over time, another name started to creep into people's minds, Mule. Partly because people kept getting one detail wrong. They would look at the logo and say, "Oh look, a donkey." Close, but not quite. So eventually, they embraced the name directly and it became Mule Coffee Roasters, a name that not only represented their company, but also the philosophy behind it. Not just Colombian coffee with a direct line back to the source. For the first time, Cesar had real control. He could choose the beans he believed in. He had direct feedback from the markets, and he knew what customers liked, what flavors they preferred. No more guesswork, no more assumptions. He knew how to connect the bean to the cup. For many roasters, that's where the journey ends. You choose from a trader's list, trust the paperwork, roast the beans, and that's it. But Cesar and Nico wanted something more. They wanted to go deeper. They wanted more connection. For them, Colombian coffee wasn't just a category. It had to mean something. It was a connection to the land, to the people growing it. So if their brand was called Colombian Connection Coffee, that connection had to mean something. Not just a name, a direct line. From producer to trader to roaster, all the way down to the coffee drinkers. They wanted to speak directly to the farmers, to understand how the coffee was grown, what sustainability on the ground actually looks like, and how much of the money makes it back to the farmers. In coffee, it's easy to talk about ethics. Free trade, sustainability, transparency, and too often roasters are left in the dark. They have to trust someone who looks good on paper, but underneath that, there might be a reality that they're not being shown. So, if Cesar and Nico were going to walk the walk, then they needed to go deeper. And in 2019, their vision led them to Cofinet's Sponsor a Farmer program. And that took them all the way back to the mountains of Colombia. Cofinet gave them a way to turn their idea into action, because in coffee, there's often a gap. Coffee makers know what the market wants, farmers know the land, but too often those two sides don't really get to talk. The program helped close the gap through real feedback, real relationships, and a clear idea of what both sides needed. But for Mule, it meant something even deeper. It brought their vision of a direct line to life. They could walk onto a farm, meet the producer, understand the land, and see the work with their own eyes. Fair trade, sustainability, transparency. These were no longer just words on the paperwork they had to blindly trust. They could verify it. They could hold the line themselves. Through that program and through local coffee networks like the Guachata Cooperative, they eventually met the producer who would become central to the La Bomba story. Cesar Buesaquillo. And what they found wasn't just good coffee. It was a producer whose standards and values matched their own. And funnily enough, the name did too. So they joined the program. But out of hundreds of farmers, how do you choose the right one? For Cesar and Nico, it came down to three things. Flavor, of course, the coffee still had to taste amazing in the cup. Transparency, where was the money going? And sustainability, what was the farmer doing to protect the land, the trees, and the very future of the farm? With that in mind, they began their cupping and their searching journey. Most of the coffees on the table were excellent. But when they tried Cesar Buesaquillo's coffee for the first time, they were amazed. The flavor was powerful, layered, explosive, and almost without thinking, the words just came out. La Bomba. In Spanish, La Bomba carries a few meanings. A pump, for one, like the pump that's pulling the richness of Colombia's volcanic soil and pushing it into the fruit. Also, a nickname for the best coffee pickers, the fastest, most precise hands working the farm. And finally, that feeling when something is just incredible. So, they decided to visit Cesar Buesaquillo's farm, and what they discovered wasn't just coffee trees. They saw a producer protecting the land, preserving a part of it as an ecological sanctuary, making sure that a creek that was desperately needed by the local wildlife was kept safe and secure. His view of sustainability went much farther than the usual checklist. Mule shares some of that story on their website if you want to browse and go a little bit deeper than we are right now. Once again, the boys were amazed by Cesar Buesaquillo's work. And that moment, they understood. This was a producer they could stand behind, a producer they could sponsor, and a producer they could grow with. And that is where La Bomba began. Not as a marketing idea and not as a seasonal release just pulled randomly from a trader's list, but as a real relationship with one producer. And as a moment they couldn't forget. That first tasting when the flavor landed so powerfully that the words just came out, La Bomba! From there, it became more than just a coffee. It became a collaboration between Mule Coffee Roasters and Cesar Buesaquillo. Now, when Mule first started working with him back in 2019, the farm was much simpler, mainly Castillo. Simple, focused, and built around one producer. And for a while, La Bomba was exactly that. One producer, one farm, one coffee that Mule truly believed in. A Castillo varietal from Cesar Buesaquillo, pushed through up to 300 hours of extended anaerobic fermentation at around 25 degrees. The result was bold, fruit-driven, and unmistakably Colombian. Wild berries, passion fruit, bright acidity, sweet dark chocolate. A single producer coffee roasted two ways, espresso and filter. Same farm, different expressions in the cup. But over time, the relationship and the demand for specialty coffee grew. Through Mule and Cofinet, new opportunities started to arise. Around 2020, Cesar Buesaquillo received around 1,000 pink bourbon trees. After years of planting, waiting, harvesting, and refining the process, pink bourbon became part of the La Bomba range, and then came yellow geisha. And now, they're experimenting with chirroso. Same producer, same care for the land, same commitment to quality, but more varieties, more possibilities, more ways to express what that farm can do. And the growth wasn't just on the coffee menu. Over the past 5 years, Mule's coffee sales have doubled, and Cesar Buesaquillo's farm has grown with them. At the beginning, Mule bought his entire production. Back then, the farm was smaller, the range was narrower, and the relationship was just getting started. But now, With more trees, more varieties, and more volume, Cesar's coffee can reach more than just one roaster. When a producer grows well, the whole chain becomes stronger. More stability for the farmer, more choice for the roaster, better coffee for the drinker. And more resources to invest back into the land. With a committed buyer, a fairer price, and a clearer path to market, farmers can think long-term. New varieties, better processing, and more investment back into the land. But this is more than a business model. Aside from growth, farmers deserve names. The land deserves to be seen, and coffee drinkers deserve to know whose hands are behind the cup. In many ways, Cesar Buesaquillo's farm became a small snapshot of Colombia's modern coffee evolution. From Castillo to pink bourbon to geisha and now to new experiments like churroso, you can almost trace the evolution of Colombian coffee through one farm. And in the next episode of Anatomy of Flavor, we'll go deeper into that story, how those coffee varieties have changed and why those changes matter. But for now, La Bomba is proof of this idea. A coffee that didn't just grow in flavor, but grew through trust, commitment, and a direct line from farm to cup. This is exactly the kind of coffee we built Specialty Roasters to find. And now, it's something you can actually taste. We've put together a Mule Coffee Roasters bundle that lets you taste this direct line we've been talking about, from Cesar Buesaquillo's farm in Colombia all the way to right here in Australia. Inside, you'll find 3 coffee varieties from the same producer. First, La Bomba Castillo. This is the one that started it all. It's the one that first impressed Cesar and Nico at the cupping table. Pushed through an extended fermentation for up to 300 hours, which creates that bold, fruit-driven profile that La Bomba is famous for. Then, you'll get 2 of our newer favorites in the specialty coffee world. Pink bourbon, a special process coffee grown between 1900 and 2200 meters. It's known for its sweetness, complexity, and elegance. Then, yellow geisha, a washed geisha from the same farm, showing a cleaner, more delicate expression of what this producer can do. Same farmer, same philosophy, 3 different expressions of just what this farm can produce. The bundle also includes an official Mule Coffee Roasters tote bag, plus 2 A5 info sheets, one telling the story of Specialty Roasters and the other telling the story of Cesar Buesaquillo's farm and these 3 coffees. While this is part of our featured drop, Mule Coffee Roasters is also joining our regular selection, roasted fresh every week. If you want to taste this story we just told, then this bundle is the place to start. You can find the link in the description and in the top comment. And that brings us to where Mule is today. Even though Colombia is where the story began, Mule Coffee Roasters is now at a new turning point. For years, their identity was built around Colombian coffee, the producers, culture, relationships, and the flavors. And that foundation is still there. But as Mule works with different cafes and coffee drinkers around Australia, one thing becomes abundantly clear. Not every cafe wants the same flavor profile. Not every customer is looking for the same cup. So Mule has started expanding beyond Colombia, bringing new coffees from new regions into their range. New regions, new flavor profiles, new possibilities, but the standards don't change. They still want to know who grew the coffee, how the land is being managed, and where the money goes. And of course, the coffee still has to taste beautiful. Fair trade, sustainability, quality. These aren't just words on the bag. They are the filter that Mule uses to decide what belongs in their lineup. So yes, Mule may no longer just be Colombian coffee, but the spirit remains the same. A direct line from producer to roaster, from barista to customer. Real people, real stories, real passion behind the cup. Not just 2 Colombians building a coffee company in Sydney, but but two people trying to shorten the distance between where coffee comes from and the people who drink it. One relationship at a time, one farm at a time, one cup at a time. So, next time you pick up a bag of coffee and you see a farmer's name on it, remember, that's not just marketing. That's a real person. Somebody got on a plane, walked onto that farm and met the person who makes that coffee. And they decided that can be the cup that gives you your next morning fuel. At Specialty Roasters, this is the kind of coffee we want people to discover. This is the kind of story we want to share. And that's it for this episode of Brand Story. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you had fun and I hope you learned something. I'm Jared and we'll see you next time.